Today I'm going to talk about the nitty-gritty part of Airbnb, whether it's rent-to-rent, a partnership model, or management. We are going to cover things like Headlease restrictions, compliance and insurances, and all local regulations that you will need to be aware of. I will also tell you about how to make sure that you're covering yourself and sharing how I navigated through these hurdles in this journey, which has helped us secure 3 apart hotels in the space of a year. The first thing that we're going to get into is just the general compliance that you need when you are operating in the property space and industry. Compliance can differ between whether you have a rent-to-rent business or whether you have an Airbnb management business. So we will cover both of those in this video. Firstly, private liability insurance. This covers you in case a guest gets injured inside one of your Airbnbs or decides to take legal action. It essentially covers you for the legal costs and any payouts if someone were to sue you. Public indemnity is sort of similar, but it covers you for claims against financial losses from clients due to mistakes that you might make. These are essential because if you make a mistake or there is the off chance you have a claim and something crops up, it can be really damaging or even cripple your business. So you need those insurances. Next, the PRS, aka the Property Redress Scheme. The PRS is essentially an independent body that sits across property where landlords, tenants, other businesses, all that kind of stuff can file complaints and take disputes if they're unhappy for whatever reason. So having this makes your business look more professional and trustworthy. And also what it does is it's like a referee. They mitigate disputes and will keep everything fair and legal within all those boundaries. So you need that as well. A final thing you have to mention about is just national and local laws. Right now, Airbnb is actually quite unregulated. The main one that we have is the 90-day rule in London. This essentially means that you can't let out a residential property on Airbnb for more than 90 days, unless you have planning permission. You can also take longer term bookings which don't count against your 90-day short-term lettings that allow you to circumnavigate this rule if you want to do Airbnb all year round in London. A lot of people, this is not my advice, but a lot of people do just ignore this rule and continue to let out their property through short-term rental platforms like Airbnb and Booking.com because it's not always tracked. There is no enforcement by the councils currently. So even though this rule does exist in London, there are a lot of people ignoring it. There is no enforcement, so it's not really regulated. Therefore, it's not too much of an issue, especially if you are the management company and you hold no legal obligation over the property. In other areas like Leeds or Manchester or other big cities in the UK, they are going to be subject to regulation to deter you from short-term lets. For example, Leeds City Council has proposed planning changes to make sure that basically short-term rentals are going to be subject to planning permission. Manchester has thought about potentially adding charges and taxes on one-night stays in certain areas. Although they might seem like they're not threatening, councils are definitely starting to dive deeper into regulation into the short-term rental market. So this will mean, just like HMOs, that you will need to stay on top of it and abide by it as it comes through. Now let's talk about use classes and how they work, what do they mean, and why it matters. This will continue to matter even more when eventual enforcement comes in. Every property in the UK falls into a planning class, and this decides what the property can actually legally, keyword, be used for. So if you want to change the legal use of the property, you need to get planning permission. Properties that are used as residential homes generally fall under C3 planning class. This is for residential use, not commercial. Alternatively, properties that fall under the C1 use class are named for commercial use. So this can be shops, barbers, restaurants, etc. Currently, there is no clear use for Airbnb properties, which leaves the short-term market in a grey area. HMOs have their own legislation, Airbnbs and short-term rentals don't yet. But when they are written into law, you will have to make sure that you are compliant. Now, anti-money laundering. As a management company, you need to register for anti-money laundering to make sure you are compliant. People like to make a big song and dance about this and claim it's a big deal, but it's £200. You do a course for a few hours and then you get in return an anti-money laundering number to show that you're registered and you can start trading while they approve your application, which when I did it, didn't take me that long. But people like to make a way bigger issue out of it than it actually is. So that covers the compliance side of Airbnb. But now let's focus on restrictions such as mortgage terms and Headlease restrictions, which can really limit the scaling and the capacity for growth in your Airbnb business. How can you navigate around them in order to secure rent-to-rent and management deals to grow your Airbnb business? something we talk about even more in the Airbnb Mastery Academy. First, let's talk about mortgages and the risk. If landlords are paying their mortgages, they are subject to mortgage terms in their contracts. Essentially, the mortgage provider can say, you cannot use your property for this. For example, they could say you're not allowed to use the property for Airbnb. With this in mind, the landlord runs the risk that if the mortgage company finds out that they are making income from Airbnb when that was not the original use case of the property, there could be an issue. There are specific service accommodation mortgages, but these are more expensive, so landlords don't like them. To be honest, 99% of mortgage companies don't really care, and it's not something that is religiously enforced or checked. But in theory, the landlords are in breach of their contract. Here's where it gets interesting. So the risk isn't wholly on you. It's more so on the landlord because it's their mortgage and their property. If the mortgage provider does come after them, they could hurt their lending terms, and it could mean that you will lose that property in your portfolio. We have in our contracts a liquidated damages clause, so if this does happen, the landlord will pay us back money we invested in the property to help us protect ourselves. And this is where you want to essentially protect yourself against any situations where you've chased after for money or have issues with mortgage companies or landlords. We've never had to let go of a property because we've always been super careful about this. This differs between rent to rent and management. Rent to rent, obviously you have more risk because you are renting the property, and in theory, the mortgage company can come after you for income if they really want to. Whereas management, because you are just a managing agent, the landlord is wholly and exclusively responsible. Let's talk about another pain in the ass for a lot of people, which is Headlease Restrictions. To break it down, if you've got an entire block of apartments, in this context, there is a freeholder who owns the building and the block of apartments. They grant leases to the leaseholders, the people who actually own the apartments individually, but actually don't really own them. Now, the leaseholder is someone who's bought the right to use one or more of those individual flats for a number of years. For example, they could sign leasehold for 100 years. And what the head lease does is the head lease is the main lease agreement that sets out the rules and regulations for that building in terms of what's allowed, what isn't allowed for that entire building, and this is set by the freeholder. One of the most common issues that people face in the Airbnb game is that agreements and head leases say that you cannot do any short-term letting or Airbnb. If it is found out that the landlord is using a property for short-term lets, the freeholder can take action against the landlord and potentially end their leasehold, fine them, whatever it is. What you need to factor in is that Airbnb was created long after most of these head leases were made. So it doesn't specifically say you can't do Airbnb, but it says no business use allowed. And something that is being discussed at the moment with the Labour government is actually the idea of common hold ownership. This is essentially the idea that there is no one freeholder at the top of the chain and would act as a more democratic agreement among the individual landlords or owners of the leasehold flats in the building. So this could all change, this could all change the regulations, but head leases are tough to get around at the moment. A lot of companies don't enforce them, so the management company on the building won't kick people out, won't check if they're doing Airbnb, won't enforce it, but this is a calculated risk because again, you could lose that property in your portfolio. It's the landlord's risk if they rent it out to you, or that you're doing management, but at the end of the day, you could lose a property in your portfolio, and you don't want that. For now, it's not really what we care about. What we care about is how can you get around head lease restrictions. And as I said, I do know people who've taken the calculated risk and operate in buildings where they shouldn't really be allowed to, and they make money. I personally wouldn't always recommend it as I said, it's a calculated risk. If you put a lot of effort and money into a unit and it gets shut down, it could have been avoided if you had done your due diligence properly. How have we managed to get 3 apart hotel deals and get around head lease restrictions in certain buildings? How do you do that? Well, you need to get in touch with the freeholder. You need to get in touch with the guy who makes the decisions. By doing this, we've managed to secure 3 apart hotel deals, 2 in Leeds and 1 in Harrogate. I'm sorry to say that isn't a secret quick hack that got us those blocks and apartments in the first place. The freeholder doesn't just magically agree. What you have to do is you have to network and you have to put yourself in scenarios where there will be these type of developers and people in the rooms. So you need to go to developer networking events, business high tier networking events, and you can secure contacts in that way. How we also did it is went through things like the planning portal and asking planning agents directly who've done these conversions in these buildings. That's a really good way of using referrals and leverage to get through. So you're never actually going to get in touch with developers if you're doing stuff like Open Rent, Spare Room, Rightmove, etc. It's very, very hard to get in touch with these people. So you have to be creative. They're big dogs, they've got the money. So you have to use creative methods to get in touch with these people so that you can actually branch out and make money that way. Once you get in touch with the freeholders and developers, then you can have more discussions. What we've done there is we've essentially had discussions with freeholders and developers and told them what we do, how does the business model work, how does the Airbnb management work, how does the rent-to-rent model work, and why essentially it's actually beneficial to them. And if we can take multiple apartments off their... Alexa, stop. And if we can take multiple apartments off their hands, it's very beneficial to them. A developer is always going to love you if you're going to rent 10 apartments or manage 10 apartments for them, take the operational hassle and give them a lot of money. And these are the kind of creative methods and things that we cover more in the Airbnb Mastery Academy. So that concludes this video on Airbnb compliance and mortgage and head lease restrictions. This video came off the back of one of the YouTube comments that was left on a previous video. So if you have any other questions about Airbnb, drop a comment below and I can break down other aspects of Airbnb. And if you're interested in starting your Airbnb business, make sure to watch the next video.